How does a modern, developed nation get brought to the brink of total collapse in just 7 days? It sounds like fiction, but this just happened. And the most shocking part? It was a crisis that never should have occurred in the first place. Imagine 600 fuel stations completely empty, emergency services forced to a standstill, the entire nation's supply chain in tatters. This isn't a dystopian movie, this was the reality in Ireland just days ago. So how did it all go so wrong, so fast? The story begins in the second week of April 2026, and it starts with the country grinding to a halt. In a matter of days, around a third of the entire nation's petrol stations were completely bone dry. But it gets worse. The National Emergency Coordination Group issued a terrifying warning. Fire services were to stop all non-essential activity. Ambulance services had to curtail routine patient transport. At the same time, reports flooded in of failing food deliveries, with empty shelves appearing in shops. The country's economic engine was, quite literally, running out of fuel. Of course, a crisis like this never just appears from nowhere. You have to follow the money and the oil. The spark that lit this fire began thousands of miles away. A conflict in the Middle East leads to the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical arteries for global oil. The effect was immediate and devastating. Global oil prices soared, and in Ireland, a country on the other side of the world, diesel prices surged past €2 a litre, and that's where the crisis truly begins. You see, this is where a global event slammed into a very hard Irish reality. Ireland is massively dependent on imported energy. In 2022, a staggering 82% of its energy needs were met by imports. Think about that for a second. And the system has a critical weakness. While Ireland does have a refinery, Whitegate in County Cork, it's the only one. A single facility supplying 40% of the country's fuel. It's a textbook single point of failure. The government saw the pressure building and tried to get ahead of it, announcing a €250 million relief package back on March 24th. It was designed to trim prices at the pump by a few cents. But here's a question for you. If your entire livelihood depended on diesel, would a few cents make a difference? For the hauliers and farmers, it felt like a drop in an ocean of rising costs. They argued the measures were totally insufficient, and they were about to prove it in the most dramatic way possible. April 7th. This is when everything changes. The protests began, but this wasn't some formal union-led strike. No, this was a decentralized movement organized on social media and fueled by pure, unfiltered anger from the sectors being crushed. Convoys of trucks clogged motorways, but that wasn't the real problem. The real damage, the move that would cripple the nation, came from blockades targeting its fuel arteries. They blocked depots, and most critically, they choked off access to Whitegate. Remember that single point of failure? It was now completely cut off. And here we see the government's first critical and arguably arrogant miscalculation. Instead of engaging with the people blockading the economy, they chose procedure. A minister stated that the protesters couldn't be negotiated with because they had no official leaders. The government would only speak with official representative bodies. What do you think of that response? Let me know in the comments. It was a rigid, bureaucratic stance that created a dangerous standoff. It seemed completely absurd. While ministers were looking for a formal committee to schedule a meeting with, the unofficial blockades were bleeding the economy dry minute by minute. Just 3 days into the chaos, the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, had to admit the situation was unconscionable, calling the blockades an act of national sabotage and warning that Ireland was on the precipice of a disaster. If you're finding this breakdown of how systems can fail interesting, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. We dive into stories like this every week, and it really helps the channel out. By April 9th, over 100 stations had run dry. Just 2 days later, by April 11th, that number didn't just climb, it exploded to 600. The fuel was in the country, but it was trapped behind the blockades. The system was paralyzed. By April 12th, the government finally acted. Police cleared some blockades, restoring access to the Whitegate refinery. The immediate crisis appeared to be over, but while some fuel started moving, the situation was far from resolved. Talk began immediately of a full, countrywide strike, and the damage already done was immense. Because what this crisis truly did was expose Ireland's profound structural weakness. Relying so heavily on imports and having a single refinery for distribution is a house of cards. When just a few key sites are restricted, the entire national supply chain seizes up in a matter of days. But the biggest failure wasn't just infrastructure, it was leadership. The government's primary failure was its speed, or total lack thereof. They completely underestimated the public's anger, they were far too rigid in their response, and they tried to substitute the threat of force for actual, concrete policy. That created a massive credibility gap, and it's not hard to see why a significant portion of the public actually supported the protesters. They were seen as the only ones standing up against crushing costs. So, in the end, a government nearly broke its own country in just 7 days by failing to grasp one simple truth. You cannot run a modern economy without fuel, and you cannot ignore the people who transport it. A slow, procedural response turned a global price shock into a self-inflicted national emergency. Some of the blockades are gone for now, but the underlying vulnerabilities that allowed this to happen are still there. It begs the question, is any modern economy truly safe from this kind of rapid collapse? And more importantly, has the lesson actually been learned? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this analysis, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.